Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jata Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Everybody had a day off yesterday morning. Not everybody, but yeah. But I'm happy to see you all here. And today, how many people are here like for the first class? Okay, no, the very first class that we had, because today's probably like class number 9 or 10. 10. So I made a promise on that day, or at least I shared my opinion on that day. I shared my opinion that I believe that the states of awareness described in these ancient texts, these very elevated states of awareness, that they're not just some mythical thing, or they're not just something that was available to people in previous ages, or that they're only for the very rare individual that might be able to wander up into these mountains all alone, sit in a cave by themselves, isolated from the world, but that every one of us in this room could achieve that goal of yoga if we simply made it our number one priority in life and practiced it in a way that was suitable for us. Because there are different paths of yoga, and some of them may be more suitable for us and some less suitable. I stand by that. And today is the first day where we may begin to kind of wrap up the what I've referred to earlier as the predicament of the soul, wrapping up what's the trap, what's the nature of the trap that we're in, and begin to talk about the solutions, which are the 4 paths of yoga. So you may remember I defined yoga as a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Everybody remember that? Some of you remember that? Yes? And so we began by discussing the nature of the self, and then we discussed the mind and how the mind is in between us and the experience of our own true nature. And then the third part of this, part 1, would be, okay, how do we free ourselves? How do we break free? And those are the 4 paths of yoga. I think today we're going to start to at least introduce the 4 paths of yoga. But we're wrapping up the predicament of the soul appropriately, I would say, by discussing the modes of material nature, also called the gunas. And another word for guna is ropes, called ropes. It's kind of like a rope composed of three strands: the mode of goodness, the mode of ignorance, the mode of passion, or as we were calling them with the Sanskrit terms, sattvaguna, rajaguna, and tamaguna. And I'm not going to go too much into that unless you have specific questions about it, but I will just say this, that we discussed that the yoga, I guess this is a bit of a recap, that the yogis say that the world that we're moving around in is composed of material energy, and we're composed of spiritual energy. So we're little sparks of spirit moving around a world that's composed of matter. And matter can be broken into three different energies. You could say elements, but let's say energies. And those are these three: sattvaguna, rajaguna, tamaguna. We compared it to a video screen, which is made up of little pixels, but each pixel has one of three colors: red, green, or blue. And then when you blend them, then they can create all these this entire spectrum of colors. So the yogis are saying there's three energies that this material world is made out of, and everything's made out of a blend of them. But you can blend them in so many ways, and you can create all of the varieties that we experience in this world. But the real important thing for the yogi is that these texts say that each one of these energies has a specific influence on us. That every object is made of a blend of these energies, but one of the energies is predominant in each object, and that the influence of that energy, whether it's sattva, rajas, or tamas, it radiates from that object. And when we come in welcome. When we come in contact with that object, then the radiation of that particular influence just enters into our mind through our senses. So if I see a certain color, the influence of that color is going to radiate through my senses and into my mind. Or if I hear a certain sound, or if I eat a certain food, the mode of material nature, the guna that's predominant in that object, will radiate from it, and it'll have an influence. It'll have an influence on my mind. And that influence will either be towards clear thinking, illumination, contentment. I feel good, I have what I need, I'm thinking clear, I'm happy, satisfied. Or if that's a sattvic influence, if it's a rajasic influence, then the influence will be kind of the opposite of contentment. I don't have what I need, I want more. I will not be satisfied until I get something external that I don't have right now. Or if the influence is tamasic, it's going to influence us in that way. We may feel lazier, more like slothful, or it's just kind of, we're more deluded, we're more confused as we move through the world. And even that confusion can be destructive or even self-destructive. And we kind of covered that in our last class. I'm going to wrap that up in a moment, but before I do, I'll just say, are there any questions about these gunas? Yes. Yes.
So Celeste from Australia. So I've been fairly new to Bhakti in the last 18 months.
Okay.
And so getting to learn the gunas and consciously trying to live a sattvic life and not always getting it right. But I guess in the scriptures, particularly the Gita and the Bhagavatam, I've read about if you live a life practicing bhakti and Krishna consciousness, you can transcend the modes of material nature. And I'm wondering what that transcendence looks like and feels like, and is that something that we can do in this planet now, or is it something in the spiritual realm?
You know who asked that question?
Yes.
No, do you know who asked the same exact question?
No.
Arjuna.
Oh.
So why don't we read his question, we'll read Krishna's answer. Why don't we do that right now?
Thank you.
Okay. So the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is just dedicated to a breakdown of the gunas and how they play out in different scenarios. And at the end of that, Arjuna turns to Krishna and asks the following question, essentially what you just asked. He asks, O my dear Lord, by which symptom is one known who has transcended these three modes? What is their behavior? And how do they transcend the modes of material nature? Okay, so essentially two questions. What is that? The person who has transcended these modes, the person who is no longer a victim of a hacked mind, influencing them in one of these three ways, or in all three of these ways at different times. What is that person like who's free? Who, even if they're in this world, is in control of themselves rather than being controlled by insidious external forces that are entering into their mind. You want to hear the answer now? Krishna says, O Arjuna, one who does not hate, and by hate I think what he means, they're not adverse to. One who is not adverse to illumination, which is sattva-guna, attachment, which is rajaguna, and delusion, when they are present, or long for them when they disappear. Who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities. In a sense, we're getting a picture of someone that's a bit distant, more they're kind of observing what's happening in the world rather than being caught in the waves of it. And now listen to everything he says here. There's kind of one common theme. Remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that these modes alone are active, who is situated in the self, and regards alike happiness and distress, who looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with an equal eye, who is equal towards the desirable and the undesirable, who is steady, situated equally well in praise and blame, honor and dishonor, who treats alike both friend and enemy, and who has renounced all material activities. Such a person is said to have transcended the modes of nature. So, especially what he's presenting there is something that earlier in the Bhagavad Gita he refers to as samatvam, even-mindedness. No matter what the external situations is, I'm situated in the self. In other words, I'm not situated in my mind or my senses, which are calling me to get something that I don't have, that I will need to be satisfied. They're satisfied. And they can kind of step back and watch how the world's moving and see how the world's, even see how it affects their own mind. I'm feeling a little like this right now. I can understand why. Look where I am. Look at what influences are in this place right now. You know, I walk into the middle of Times Square and all these lights are flashing and advertisements are there and there's so much noise and I can understand. I feel a little like this right now. But rather than saying I am this right now, I am hungry, I am angry, I am wanting something. My mind is angry, my mind is hungry, my mind is wanting something. They're situated in the self, seeing the effects that the Gunas are having, even on their own minds, but free from their influence, not controlled by them. Okay, so that's, he's saying, especially this samatvam, this even-mindedness. Earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, Krishna was asking Arjuna, instructing him, you need to fight this battle, Arjuna. You need to engage in this war. But you need to do it with the mindset of a yogi. What does that mean? It means you need to do it, and whether you win or lose, don't be attached, right? Be even-minded no matter what the circumstances are. And then he says this very interesting statement. He says that such even-mindedness, samatvam yoga uchate. Such even-mindedness is called yoga. Okay, so a lot of times people that practice, like say asana, they say, you know, like let's practice yoga off the mat. You know, off like, in other words, in our life. How do we practice yoga? Not just the asana, but how do we practice yoga in our life off the mat? One of the most fundamental practical answers to that question is practice even-mindedness. Such even-mindedness is called yoga. Okay. Okay, now to the other part of your question where you mentioned something about by practicing bhakti, one can transcend these modes. So that was part of Arjuna's question. He asked, what symptoms is one known to have transcended these three modes, and what is the behavior? And that was just answered in the verses that we just read. Especially it had to do with even-mindedness. And then he says, and how does this person transcend the modes of material nature? Now, I'm going to read you something now. And this is going to be just a slight taste, a little bit of opening into what we're going to get into about 4 or 5 classes down the road, which I'm really looking forward to. And that's the confidential teachings of the Vedas, the confidential teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, what Krishna calls the confidential teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. And that has to do with understanding that there's a person behind all the workings of the universe, and that you can connect with that person through love. That's the confidential stuff. We get a hint of that right here in what we're about to read. How do you overcome the modes of material nature? There are different yoga paths, and Krishna could answer that in different ways, but here he's going to answer it in one way. He says, it's a famous verse, Mam cha yo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. He's going to say it's by bhakti yoga. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. He's saying that mam cha yo vyabhicharena, one who without fail, bhakti yogena sevate, who serves with this inner feeling of bhakti yoga, right? One who serves like that, they at once transcend the modes of material nature, right? So I'll read the translation. One who engages in full devotional service, in full bhakti. The word is bhakti yoga. He says bhakti yogena sevate. Seva means service. Bhakti yoga means the yoga of devotion. One who engages in this full bhakti yoga, unfailing in all circumstances. In other words, they're not just a practitioner trying and sometimes living that life and sometimes dropping that life and picking it up again and dropping it again, even in the course of a day. But they become very steady at it. They at once transcend the modes of material nature, the gunas, and thus come to the level of Brahman. In the word here for Brahman, it says Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. They come to this level. We're going to talk about this too. What is Brahman realization? But Brahman realization has so much to do with being very clear about what is reality and what is illusion, and not being affected by the illusion. And that grants one that even-mindedness and other important spiritual assets that create a very peaceful mind. I don't identify with my body. I have no false identification of who I am. We could call that Brahman realization, right? I am not this body. I realize I am Brahman. I am made of spirit. I realize that the nature of this world is that it's constantly shifting, but I never shift. I'm beyond that. That's now. Here's a question, interesting question, because in this question, once we finish up these 4 paths yoga, I'm going to go through the history of how these texts came about and the progression in which they unfolded. And when we have a better understanding about that, what I'm about to say right now kind of you understand it in its context, but I'll try to say briefly right now. For Arjuna to say, how does one attain this very steady, peaceful mind? For Krishna to answer by saying, by bhakti yoga, which is this yoga of devotion, which means that there's me and there's God and there's everybody else, and we all have our individuality, and we connect through love. For a lot of yogis, having read earlier texts like the Upanishads or the Vedanta Sutra, they may say, well, now how is that? Because bhakti yoga involves forms. It involves this idea of love, and isn't love just kind of like something going on in the mind? Isn't it when we get to that higher level of truth, when we really rise up to the Brahman platform, we realize that all is one? So I wouldn't expect to hear, someone might say, I wouldn't expect you to hear that engaging this loving worship of a form. Isn't all form illusion? Isn't it forms that cause the disturbances in our minds? And how because they're here one moment and then they break down in another moment? Why are you telling me bhakti yoga? But now Krishna gives a clue to why he's saying practice bhakti yoga and you'll transcend at once the modes of material nature. And that's the last verse of the 14th chapter. And there he says, Brahmanohi pratishtaham. I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman. Krishna is saying himself, I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. He's saying that the energy of Brahman is one of my energies. It's me. It's just one feature of me. So if you connect to me, you connect to everything that is me, including a complete realization of this Brahman. If you realize who I am, Krishna is saying, then you realize everything, including the Brahman, the nature of the non-personal spiritual energy and the peace that's attained on that level. So if you connect with me with love, you already have that. It's inside that. Now, there'll be more detail about that in the Bhagavad Gita, and other texts are going to go into great detail about that point. But this is the method that Krishna prescribes for Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita to overcome the influence of the Gunas. Engage in bhakti yoga.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Any other questions about the Gunas before we move forward? Okay, then I'm just going to share this one just last thought. And that is that if a yogi, or any person for that matter, is not acutely aware of the influence of these modes of nature, is not acutely aware of these three influences and that they're radiating all over the place, then we become very vulnerable. We become very susceptible. I'm just pronouncing that correctly, right? Susceptible. We become very vulnerable and very susceptible to their influence and to their control. And we may not even realize it. We won't even realize it. Why do I feel angry right now? I feel angry because of the circumstances. I feel angry because it's justified for this reason. Why do I feel happy? Why do I feel elated one moment and disturbed the next moment? Why don't I have a peaceful, even mind? Because everything I see, everything I hear, everything I taste, everything, it's all radiating an influence. So the wise yogi, being very aware of this, is narrowing down their field of experience. As far as possible and practical, they're narrowing down their field of experience to the sattva guna, where they can have an even peaceful mind, where they can control their own mind rather than have it being controlled. Okay, make sense? Essential stuff for the youth. That's why where I live, who I associate with, what I eat, what I listen to, yogi is very careful about these things. Very careful about these things. We were speaking last night in the question and answer booth that there are two different strategies one could have for that. One is to isolate myself, which most of us practically can't do in the world that we live in, maybe to some degree for a certain amount of time in the day or something like that, so that could be helpful. But most of us live in the world. Most of us have social responsibilities. So if you can't isolate yourself, you can insulate yourself. You can kind of create a space suit for yourself, or what are the hazmat suit? So as you move through the radiation of these modes of material nature, you're not affected by them. You become influential in the world rather than being influenced in a negative way by it. So that's done through our sadhana, through our practice, through our association, etc. Make sense? Okay. All right. This is a landmark moment in our course here. We're moving on now. We talked about the predicament of the soul. We are all a spark of spiritual energy, eternal, with a nature that's blissful. But we've lost touch with that due to the influence of the mind and the programming within the mind. And that the mind is just like a computer. It's programmed with all kind of false ideas about who I am and what I think I need to be happy. This is all false programming. There's no actual truth in it. With one's reasoning power within the mind, one can analyze this and kind of process their previous thoughts and previous memories and previous information within their own mind. They can make their own thoughts and realizations healthy ones, healthy for their freedom. So that's a good thing about the mind. But the other problem is that we're moving around in a world that's very much like a virtual reality, and it's programmed with the element of time, which can make things very painful here, that changes everything, ultimately destroys everything. With the law of karma, which makes every action that we do consequential in the sense that it sends reactions back at us. And the gunas, the three modes of material nature, which means that everything's radiating a certain influence at us. And if we're unaware, we become very, very much victimized by it. That is the predicament of the self. That is the malady that we suffer from. And that is what yoga is meant to help us with, cure us from, free us from this type of bondage. Now we talk about the practices. Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Now we're going to talk about the practices, and that is 4 paths of yoga. Everybody ready? Okay. I want to preface the discussion of these 4 paths, which we're probably going to do like 1 per day for the next 4 days, but there's a bit of an introduction to it. And that is that, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that we can all achieve the goal of yoga, that we all have the potential to do that in this life. But the challenge is to find a practice of yoga that's going to be very suitable for our circumstances, suitable for our own psychology. And I want to discuss a bit about the Mahabharata, which is the great epic in which the Bhagavad Gita is set. And within the context of the Bhagavad Gita, we really get a breakdown of the 4 different paths of yoga and their practicalities. Bhagavad Gita is essentially like a comparative study of all the different types of dharmas or all the different types of yogas that have been spoken about in the previous literature, like the Upanishads and the Vedas. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna compares them to one another, validates them all, but also gives his recommendations about what's most practical or what's most favorable. And so in the course of that, Krishna uses 2 words or terms to categorize these 4 paths of yoga. And he puts 2 of them under one umbrella and 2 of them under another umbrella. All right? And this is real essential. The words that he uses are karma sannyasa, in the Sanskrit terms he uses karma sannyasa and karma yoga. Karma sannyasa means action, or even more fundamentally, we could say, work. Like sometimes they say work, right? Work, action. And in this context, it especially means in our social dealings. What is my work? What are my actions, in a sense? What do I do? What are my social responsibilities? Am I a mother? Am I a father? Right? That's my karma. Am I a teacher? Am I a business person? Am I a husband? Am I a wife? I have social responsibilities. So some of these paths fall under the umbrella of karma sannyasa, which means I relinquish my social responsibilities. Sannyasa means to give them up. So I renounce my social responsibilities. That's the kind of person that isolates, that walks away from the world. 2 of these paths, to practice them, and especially to complete them, requires walking away from the world. At least that's how it's presented in these traditional texts. Make sense? So the term that he uses, then he describes another yoga. And this other yoga for Arjuna, he's having trouble processing it. That you can be a yogi and socially engaged. There are several times in the Mahabharata where Arjuna and his brothers were exiled from the city, exiled from the kingdom, and wandered up into these mountains. Yesterday, actually, we spent some time on the very path that they walked. So many great sages from the path. Just on the other side of the river, there's a path that goes all the way up. And so several times Arjuna and his brothers had to wander into these mountains, and they would live in the forest, and they would meet the yogis, they would meet the sages. And they saw that this is how you practice yoga. You walk away from the world, right? We're city people. We have political responsibility and influence in life. And if you want to practice yoga, you walk away from that. You go up into the mountain. And all of these warriors, they were like kings. They all had in mind, the day will come where I walk away from all of this, and I'll go up and live with the yogis. You read about it again and again, and you read the Puranas again and again and again and again. You read Mahabharata. The kings are always doing this. They take up their social responsibility, and as soon as they find someone that they can give that responsibility to, then they leave the world behind and they go up to the mountains. So when Arjuna, when he feels the pinch of material life, or maybe pinch isn't even the right word because it was like he felt overwhelmed, he thinks, I want to become a yogi. But in his idea of yoga is you walk away from everything. I've seen the yogis. I've seen that they're out there with nothing. They don't have social influence. They don't have wealth, any property, no reputation, fame. All the things that he has as a warrior, they don't have. But what they also don't have is all the anxiety that he's feeling, They have peace of mind. They have happiness that comes from within. They have detachment from everything external. He's thinking, that's what I need. I need to become a yogi. And becoming a yogi means you walk away from the world. And Krishna's telling him in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, there's another way to practice yoga. There's a way to have the mindset of a yogi and to develop more deeply the mindset of yogi while you're embracing your social responsibilities and working in the world. And the term that Krishna uses for that, karma yoga, right? It's yoga performed through one's actions, through one's social engagement, social responsibilities. Two different ideas. Because I want to save us some confusion, the word karma yoga is used in two ways in the Bhagavad Gita. Because in one sense, it's used as this umbrella term for socially engaged yoga, but then it also becomes a term for one of those paths, one of two of those paths, right? So in this case, I'll use the English term, socially engaged yoga, as juxtaposed to socially withdrawn yoga. Right? And then when I use the term karma yoga, I'm using it as one of two yoga paths that fall under the umbrella of socially engaged yoga. Does that make sense? I know I'm just throwing stuff out, and maybe I'm throwing new terms out and all that. Let me try to just say it one more time. Raise your hand if that is not abundantly and absolutely clear what I just said. Okay. Be honest, because we're going to be tested now. Krishna uses the term karma sannyasa for this yoga where you walk away from the world, and there's two yogas that fall under that umbrella. And he uses the term karma yoga to cover yoga where you're engaged in the world. But when you take those two yogas where you're engaged in the world, one of them is called karma yoga also. So when I say karma yoga, are you talking about the broader umbrella term or the more specialized, specific term? So to save us that confusion, when we talk about the umbrella terms, I'm going to use the English terminology. Socially withdrawn yoga, the yoga where I withdraw from society and I withdraw from my social responsibilities and I walk away. And socially engaged yoga. So yoga where I'm living in a family and I have a job and an occupation and roles that I play, like that. Clear? Okay. And I wanted to just speak a little bit about Arjuna and his mindset, because he's such a fascinating character. He's really the hero of the Mahabharata, and he's such a qualified man. He's as a warrior, he's practically unparalleled. But it's not just that he was like big and strong or even just skillful. He was certainly all of those. But really what made him so great was his attitude and his self-discipline. His guru was named Drona. And Drona was just like this incredibly brilliant, tactical military leader. He was like worked directly under the king in training up the warriors and training up the army and training up the generals. He was incredibly well respected, incredibly accomplished. And Arjuna was one of his students amongst many, many very qualified students. But Arjuna's attitude, his attitude as a disciple, his respect for his teacher, and his respect not just externally, but his internal respect, the love that he had for his teacher and his appreciation for his teacher was so deep that he was just being blessed by Drona, just constantly blessed, blessed with his affection, blessed with his knowledge, all of his skills and everything. He just became receptive to it all. And it's said that Drona loved Arjuna like a son, even more than he loved his own son, who was also an incredibly accomplished warrior. Their connection was so tight. And in Arjuna, we see again and again, he's the one. There's one famous story where, to test the students, Drona places like a wooden bird high up in a huge tree, and he's telling one person after another to draw back their bow and aim at this target. And he asks, he pulls up one great warrior, in training, and he says, "Tell me what you see." He says, "I see the tree and I see the bird." And he says, "Step away, like you failed, And he calls up another person, "I see the tree and I see the bird." One after another, this is what they're saying. And one after another, he's saying, "No, you step aside." And then he calls up Arjuna. He says, "Arjuna, tell me what you see." He says, "All I see is the bird." He says, "Describe the bird." He says, "All I see is its eye." He says, "Fire." It said that when Drona heard him say, "All I see is the eye," it said the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He said, "Fire," and pow, Arjuna hit the target. He had an understanding. They had a connection. They had an understanding between each other, and a love that was incredibly deep. And it blessed Arjuna in such a way that he had all these good qualities of a disciple, all these good qualities of a warrior. He was fearless. He was skillful and powerful, most skillful. He was known as the greatest archer of his time. But he had this virtue about him too, this like inner virtue that was just incredibly impressive, incredible self-control. But he breaks down. We see him break down on the battlefield. Why did he break down? We never saw him break down like this before. And we see what the battle that takes place in the Mahabharata is all about. Was Arjuna and his brothers were destined to be, particularly Arjuna's elder brother Yudhishthira, was destined to become the king. Just by age, his father was the king, but then his father died. So as young men, they were raised by their uncle who had 100 other sons. And their uncle, I'm just going to call him the blind king because it's easier to remember than these long names. The blind king, he was advised by his well-wishing advisors, you need to love your nephews, the Pandavas, Arjuna and his brothers, the same way that you love your own sons. You should embrace them and love them just as dearly as you love your own sons. But he could never do that. And part of the problem with that is that his own sons were really quite crooked. They lacked the virtue that the Pandavas had. And so you're training who are going to be the leaders of the future. And he's more invested in his own sons who lack virtue than the Pandavas who have such great virtue. Throughout the Mahabharata, the eldest son of the blind king, named Duryodhana. Duryodhana is just entirely envious of Arjuna and his brothers, and even as a youngster, he plots in ways to kill them and attempts to kill them many times. And as they grew older and they grew more influential, he tried to kill the entire family. He did this such a dastardly thing. Is he said, "Let me offer you a palace. I've designed a home just for you. It's incredibly opulent, and I want you to live in this palace. It's a gift." But Yudhishthira had his well-wishers who are almost like spies, and they advised him, this home is not really a gift. This home has been designed specifically to be flammable, and his intention is to burn you in a fire. And at that point, the Pandavas had no real politically they were in a weak position. They didn't have a lot of allies. And so they had to burn down the house and escape and live incognito. So everybody thought they were dead, but actually they were alive. But they had to disguise themselves. For years, they had to live like that. And only at a certain point were they able to come back out. And when they came back out, they were more powerful than ever, and they had allies. And it just made Duryodhana more envious and more angry, more hateful towards them. And because he was never able to excel them as a warrior or excel them as a prince or a king, he had an evil uncle named Shakuni who came up with a plot. And that plot was to take everything from the Pandavas through a crooked gambling match. And we can go into like why Yudhishthira, the elder brother who's so virtuous, got caught up in this gambling match. But somehow he felt compelled that he had to compete. And in that match, he lost everything. And so the Pandavas not only lost all their property, but they lost even their own freedom. They became the slaves to Duryodhana. And even they lost Draupadi, their wife. Now, Draupadi was this incredibly special woman. Throughout the Mahabharata, she's praised for her courage and for her beauty and for her virtue. She's not even exactly human. She's kind of like half human and half goddess. She was born out of a fire. And all 5 Pandavas loved her very dearly. And they were all married to her, which was an unusual circumstance. But the most painful episode in all of this was that on that night of that gambling match, Duryodhana claimed Draupadi as his property and had her dragged by the hair by his younger brother Dushasana into a public arena. And the Pandavas felt helpless to do anything because they were bound by a vow that they had taken entering into the match. So they had to watch their cousin expose, in some very crude way, he exposed his thigh to Draupadi and said, "You sit here now, you're my property." And she refused to do so. And so then he ordered Dushasana, his younger brother, strip her naked right now in front of everyone. And so he grabbed her sari and started pulling on it. And she was holding on to her sari, and he was pulling, and she was trying to hold on. She's turning to everyone. No one can help her. And this is one of the most famous scenes of the great epics of India, this Draupadi in this position. And in realizing that she was going to be overpowered, her husbands couldn't help her. The king couldn't help her. The elders couldn't help. Nobody was stepping forward to help her. She's just all alone trying to hang on. And she realized, I don't have the strength to hang on. She lets go of the sari. She puts her arms up in the air. And just like we do here in Kirtan every night, she calls out to Krishna. This is something you can think about when you're doing Kirtan here in the evenings. Right? She calls out, "Hey Govinda." She calls out to Krishna. And mystically, unlimited sari appears, and no matter how much he pulls, there's more and more and more and more until he's just exhausted and he gives up. Long story short, just having to witness that was so traumatic for Arjuna, so painful. And then they were all exiled for 13 years into the forest. They couldn't come back for 13 years. So Arjuna and all his brothers and Draupadi, they all have to leave. And before they leave, they all take vows. Each one of the 5 brothers talks about when they come back. You see, because what happened was, in one sense, a political coup just took place. The people that were meant to become the rulers, they just had that stripped by them, by these evil people, their evil cousins. And now they're exiled. They have to go. And so for 2 reasons, they said that when we come back, this is what we're going to do. These are the people that we're going to kill when we come back. And it wasn't seen as just like a wild fit of anger, but it was seen as like a really serious vow to correct the wrongs that have been done. The political wrong of the evil rulers taking over, but also the very personal the very personal issue of having them seen their wife really any woman, but what to speak of the personal nature of it when it was their own wife mistreated in this way. So evilly mistreated in this way. So they all took vows about who they were going to kill when they came back. And Arjuna's elder brother Bhima took such, what's the word? Such serious and grave vows that they were practically shocking to everyone. But everyone was kind of behind it because everyone got it. These evil men cannot be allowed to take over the government. So Bhima got up and said, when I return from the forest in 13 years, I will personally kill all 100 sons of the blind king. And he said, and the thigh that Duryodhana exposed to Draupadi, with my club, I'll shatter that thigh. And then I'll kill him. And he said, and the hand of Dushasana, the hand that touched her hair and dragged her in, the one that tried to strip the sari off her, he said, the hand that touched Draupadi's hair, I'll sever that hand from its body. I'll rip open his heart, and I'll drink his blood. I swear to you that I will do this. And everyone's like, whoa. So this was a very emotional scene. And these vows were very real. They really meant these. And then they all had to immediately take off their royal clothes, put on the clothes of wandering mendicants, and leave. And Draupadi was not at all happy with this because she's kind of like warrior princess in the sense that she's got the mood of a warrior somewhat inside her. And she's kind of disappointed with her husband. It's great that you're taking these vows, but I don't understand why you're not doing it right now. And it created this tension within their own family. So now he's had to watch his wife mistreated this way and not be able to do anything about it. He's seen how much it pained her. Now he's seeing she's upset with his brothers, and it's created a whole tension in the family. The whole thing was a very traumatic experience. But Arjuna's got one thing that he can meditate on for 13 years, his vow of coming back and righting these wrongs and killing these evil men in a battle. And I find I used to tell this, exactly what I just shared with you, with yoga audiences some years ago. And usually I could look at people's faces, and sometimes the questions I would get, I knew what they're thinking, like, but aren't yogis supposed to be peaceful? But then after the Me Too movement, I find that people are like, yes, right? Come back and let's deal with these evil men, And so that was, Arjuna had 13 years to think about this. And he's telling his wife all along, I promise you I'm going to do this. Don't you doubt it for a moment. We will carry out these vows. We will wrong this right. It's deep within him. So the Bhagavad Gita is the moment, 13 years later, where they're standing on the battlefields. And Arjuna, the very first thing that happens in the Bhagavad Gita is that the armies are lined up. And you can picture like just a long path between these two armies of thousands and thousands of soldiers. And Krishna is driving Arjuna's chariot. And Arjuna tells Krishna, please drive my chariot between the two armies so that I can see who it is that I have to fight today. And Krishna drives that chariot. You can imagine, like, when the real movie finally comes out, this will be like a glorious scene, like this chariot, the beautiful Krishna driving it, and Arjuna looking all like super powerful, ready to carry out his vows, determined. And in a cloud of dust, behind their chariot as it's coming between these two armies, and the armies are just lined up with one powerful warrior after another, and they were looking at Arjuna, the most famous of warriors coming out here, waiting 13 years for this moment, down to kill. And that chariot's coming through, and Krishna stops the chariot. There's so many thousands of people lined up. He stops it in front of two men. It says, Bhishma Drona Samukha. Everyone, the yoga teachers know mukha. What does mukha mean? Face. Stops right in the face of two men, Bhishma and Drona, the two men that Arjuna loved more than anyone. It was like his grandfather and his guru. We could go on and on about the nature of that relationship, or those relationships. But when he's standing right in front of them, and he realizes that he needs to fight against them, he needs to kill them, and that so many other relatives and friends and people are going to die on this battlefield. Practically all the warriors are going to die. He's thinking of all the people that he knows. and all of these widows that will be created, who he knows, because all these people are going to die. And then he breaks down. And Arjuna had never broken down like this before. He feels such intense anxiety. All the things that we talk about, this programming the mind, this problematic programming the mind, he's feeling it all. His voice is choking up. Tears are coming from his eyes. He can barely speak. And he says, Krishna, I cannot fight. And then he surrenders to Krishna. You become my guru. You tell me what to do. But what he was expressing to Krishna is he said this one phrase that's really revealing. It may not mean so much to us unless we really understand the culture. But he says, I will not fight. And he says, it's better for me to live as a beggar. Better for me to live as a beggar. He was saying, I want to become like one of these yogis, not like a warrior who takes on social responsibility. And the warrior is the one that gives in charity. And it's the renunciate, the sannyasi that walks away from this world, who goes up into the mountains and becomes a beggar. And so he's saying, I want to become a yogi so that I have peace of mind. I'm suffering too intensely right now. I want to practice yoga. I want to be a yogi. And Krishna's telling him, excellent. That's what you should do. You should become a yogi, but you should do it by fighting this battle. And Arjuna just can't put it together. What do you mean by fighting this battle? You're telling me to do two different things. You're saying, become a yogi, have a peaceful mind, use your reasoning and your intelligence, and so on. Renounce the things of this world. Well, isn't it that we fight to get the things of this world? To get kingdom, to get property, to get fame, to get influence and power? And I have all those things, and I'm in anxiety. So isn't the answer to that to walk away from this world, to walk away and become a yogi? And Krishna's telling him, no, Arjuna, there's another way to become a yogi. That you can bring the knowledge of the yogi, and with the knowledge comes the detachment of the yogi, and engage them in your work in this world. And that idea is kind of new in the Bhagavad Gita. We don't read about this in the previous texts like the Upanishads. The Upanishads are more telling us walk away from the world, renounce this world. And now Krishna is teaching about this yoga, this socially engaged yoga, that you can become a real yogi. Not even just like it's some consolation prize for people that can't handle walking away from the world. No, he's saying actually this is a more powerful yoga. It works faster. It's easier and it works faster. And even sometimes he's going to say this is the real yoga. The one who does their duty as they're obliged in this world. But they do it without attachment to the fruits of their work. He says that person is the real sannyasi, the real renunciate, and the real yogi, the real mystic. He's encouraging Arjuna to see it as a better practice, a better yoga, this engaged, that you can work in this world and externally look just like everybody else that's working in the world. But what's going on internally is just like the yogi, right? You have a completely different mindset. And that mindset means I have the ability, even as I work in this world, as a father, as a mother, as a business person, or whatever other occupation I have, that I have the ability to do the duty, do it with full effort, but without any attachment to the results of the work. Do it because it's the right thing to do, right? And not take anything from me. And what that does, we've been talking about karma a couple days back. What it does is it frees one from the karma. It frees one from the results of the activity because you're not doing it for a selfish purpose. And we're going to talk about that more when we talk about karma yoga specifically. So here's the point, is that Arjuna, up until the 6th chapter is done, Arjuna just can't put it together. He's thinking that these are two separate things, working in the world and practicing yoga. But he finally gets it as Krishna speaks the 6th chapter, and Krishna lays out what it's going to take to do this practice. It's kind of, we just ran out of time. It's just getting all worked up. I'm going to complete this, and we're going to begin to talk about Ashtanga Yoga tomorrow, okay? Same time, same place. And I just want to make a couple quick announcements. At 11, I believe today, and I hope I'm not mistaken, but 11 o'clock, I believe Satchidananda Swami is giving a class here. I'm sorry, thank you, 11:30. He's an exceptional speaker, and he's speaking about how to develop meditative absorption. Practically all of us probably practice some kind of meditation, but most of us have trouble absorbing the mind deeply. He's very realized in this, and he has a very practical way and helpful ways to explain it. He'll be teaching that for the next 2 days at 11:30. So if you're free, I recommend you attend that. Of course, there's Kirtan coming right after this. And Gabby, who's not here right now, is able to connect you to all these classes. You can scan a code, and if you want to hear the earlier classes and receive all recordings of all the other classes, she can help you do that. She's probably going to pop up around here sometime. I'm sorry that I broke it. Such an important moment, but we'll pick it up tomorrow. Thank you all so very much. Hari Om Tat Sat. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Adikarta Prabhu is here every day after class, and he's an excellent person to go to with questions. If you have questions and answers, he's usually available just outside here, sometimes sitting in the garden here. And he's also highly recommended if you'd like to go deeper into these topics. Thank you so much. Hari Bol.